Thank you for your interest in extending your organization's mission and budget by involving community volunteers in your work. I'm Michelle Raymer. I'm a Senior Program Officer at Volunteer Iowa. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting a link within the application for this initiative. We know that nonprofits are really being stretched to continue to meet growing and changing needs in their community while also balancing budget pressures. But we also know that you have an amazing asset that can really help you accomplish those goals, which is your community. Research shows that volunteerism and national service are cost-effective ways to not only meet those community needs, but to do so in a way that's sustainable and builds wellness, civic engagement, and social capital in the process. We've been conducting service enterprise in Iowa for about the past 10 years and have seen really a tremendous change among organizations that have participated. In fact, one executive director was recently telling us about how right before they started, they had a staff leave, and she wasn't sure if they'd be able to continue participating, but decided to power through and give it a shot. Because of participating, she reported that they were able to engage volunteers to help reduce the stresses that were put on other staff in order to give themselves the time to really look at the position, re-identify what it really needed to include, and then take the time to hire the right person instead of rushing just to hire anyone to get someone else in the door. Yet we know many other organizations haven't participated because of those same challenges. They just don't have the capacity to take the time for training and planning and building their capacity. And so from that really came the idea of not only finding funding to be able to provide service enterprise at no cost to organizations when it usually has a value of $15,000, which we know would be out of reach for many organizations, but to also do so while offering some implementation funding alongside of it. The hope that doing that, those funds could help cover the cost of participation, whether that's staff time, travel, recruitment systems, anything else that are identified that the organization needs. So we hope that through this training and implementation funding opportunity, more organizations will really have that breathing room and space to make and implement a plan that expands what they can accomplish while engaging volunteers in the community that really lighten the load on staff. So during today's informational webinar, we'll share a little bit more about Volunteer Iowa and the variety of resources we offer, why you may want to participate in the initiative, what the process itself includes, what the expectations are of the organizations that participate, and we'll also review the application process so you're familiar with what will be expected. So a little bit about Volunteer Iowa. We are a division of state government, part of HHS, and we really believe in the power of volunteerism to improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement. In fact, it's our mission. So we know that volunteering is really beneficial for the organizations where volunteers serve. If they're helping at a humane society, the dogs they walk are more socialized, more likely to be adopted. If they are mentoring youth, those youth are more likely to succeed academically. So certainly while the community benefits, the volunteer also benefits. So there's lots of research that shows volunteers have improved health and wellness, mental health benefits. Youth who volunteer learn skills, do better in school, have better relationship with teachers and peers, and actually often have improved mental health and physical health themselves. The same for seniors. Businesses who encourage their employees to volunteer actually see increased productivity and engagement from those employees who are out in the volunteering and are actually more profitable. And communities benefit from all of those reasons, but also from an increase in social capital and connectedness within communities. And so how we approach our work is really building the supply of volunteers, encouraging volunteers to get connected in their community, making sure all Iowans feel like there's a place that they can go out and volunteer, and making it a part of the culture of what we do as Iowans. So building up that supply of people who volunteer, but also helping to build the demand for volunteers. We want to make sure that nonprofits are creating those opportunities for Iowans to get out there and serve their community, and making sure that those opportunities are really mutually beneficial, that it's great for both the individual volunteering, that they have a great experience, but also the nonprofit, that it's actually meeting a need, it's actually moving their mission forward. If someone volunteers at your organization and has a great experience, they're likely to go out and tell their friends and neighbors and be a great advocate for your group. But if they have a poor experience, they'll tell them that as well. And they might be less likely to volunteer overall, which hurts the entire community by not having that volunteer who might have had a great experience elsewhere. So we want to make sure that no matter where volunteers go, they have a great experience, which is really part of the hope behind this work. And so really by partnering with you and helping you really identify those roles that volunteers can play and make sure that you and they have meaningful experiences because of it that extend your mission, you're helping us meet our mission. So what is service enterprise exactly? Service enterprise is the term that's used to define organizations that fundamentally leverage volunteers and their skills at all levels of the organization in order to move forward their social mission. The process includes the steps needed to help organizations get there through an assessment, training, consulting, and certification. Nonprofits are given the tools and technical assistance and support needed to operate at that level. Service Enterprise is actually a national program. It is administered nationally by the Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, which is the national profession for the field of volunteer engagement. And they provide a lot of other opportunities as well if you're interested. So Service Enterprise itself is really rooted in research. Probably about 15 years ago now, there was a group called Reimagining Service that got together to see how can we really advance the field of volunteer engagement. And they realized they had access through one of their group members to TCC Group's Core Capacity Assessment Tool, or CCAT, which is a tool that many nonprofits and foundations use to measure organizational capacity. So they took a look at that data and saw that there were huge gaps in the number of organizations who did volunteer engagement well. But of the organizations who excelled in volunteer engagement, they also excelled in the other core capacities. And so they named these top performers service enterprises as the organizations that really, did much better than their peers. And so there are some key findings that they found amongst all those organizations that were operating as a service enterprise that had high scores in their volunteer engagement, but also the other capacities that were measured. The first was that all organizational capacities were significantly and markedly stronger for nonprofits with a strong volunteer management model. And so this was for any organization that engaged volunteers and did it well. The organizations were stronger on the other measures. They also found that organizations that engage and manage any number of volunteers are significantly better led and managed. So they had better leadership within the organization and procedures and staffing and supervision to support their volunteers and their staff. Service enterprises were not only better led and managed, they were also significantly more adaptable and sustainable and capable of going to scale, which is really what we hope for a lot of our organizations, that we're able to serve more people or provide better, stronger, increased services in order to meet community needs. And so service enterprises were most likely to do that. And it was especially true for organizations who engaged at least 50 volunteers, because if you have fewer than 50, sometimes you can ad hoc throw things together, people still have a good experience, things get done. But when you have more than 50 volunteers, you really need to have those systems in place to make sure that on a consistent basis, people have a good experience and you're meeting your mission. The fourth thing they found was that operating as a service enterprise really required strong and well-developed human resource practices. They saw that these outstanding, high-performing organizations that they called service enterprises, that they did a great job of managing not just their volunteers, but also their paid staff, that they really saw it as paid and unpaid staff and had the supports in place to appropriately recruit, retain, and recognize both their paid and unpaid employees. And then the last key finding really gets to the economic value of really strong volunteer engagement. They found that organizations that engaged volunteers were equally as effective as their peers who did not engage volunteers, but at half the median budget. So they were performing at the same level as their peers, but at half the budget. I always have to give the caveat here that this does not mean that you can start engaging volunteers and cut your expenses in half. Volunteer engagement, volunteers are not free. There's the time for staff time to work with volunteers, supplies, equipment, etc. And so while you do have to invest to get a return, when you do invest in volunteer engagement, you're able to do twice as much as you'd be able to do without those volunteers, when you really are strategic in placing them throughout your work. So with those key findings, they worked further with Deloitte and other organizations to do case studies to see what were the key characteristics that were similar amongst all the organizations. And that was really the basis for service enterprise. They said, okay, these are the characteristics these high-performing organizations have. Let's create a process that helps other organizations reach those high levels and also meet those same characteristics. Over time, the characteristics have changed slightly as we've had more and more data from all the organizations that have gone through this process. So actually just in the last couple of years, the RGK Center at University of Texas, Austin did another update to have these characteristics, which really outline the different areas for a successful organization, that they fund and allocate resources necessary to increase volunteer engagement. They have the technology in place for their work and their volunteers to make it successful. Leadership is actively involved. Volunteer engagement isn't something, some entry-level staff does that leadership doesn't think about. Senior leadership are actively involved in conversations about what can volunteers do in our work to help us in our work, and part of that planning. And the planning is there. It's not reactive. It's being thoughtful in advance of, in the coming weeks, months, years, how will volunteers help us achieve our goals? They have strong volunteer engagement practices from recruitment and cultivation of volunteers, onboarding, training of volunteers and staff in how to work with those volunteers, and supervision and support of those volunteers. And then they look at how they can really have impact in their communities. They work to collaborate with others. They have clear communication with internal and external partners. They are prepared for growth and change, always looking to improve, and have systems for tracking and evaluating their successes. So as we go through Service Enterprise, we work with organizations to put these components in place in order to excel. The goal, again, of Service Enterprise is to strengthen the capacity of organizations to operate as these so-called service enterprises in order to leverage volunteers at all levels of what they do. We do this through a number of ways. One is just utilizing organizational assets and building on those strengths, making sure there's leadership buy-in into this effort. We have seen that without leadership buy-in, things don't change. It doesn't create a culture shift. And so that's really, really required. It strengthens human resource practices. It helps organizations be more adaptable and able to change when needed. We saw our organizations that went through Service Enterprise, they were able to adapt more quickly when COVID happened and think about how they can move to virtual models or remote opportunities to keep their volunteers engaged and continue to meet their mission. And we do it with a collaborative approach. So there's a cohort of organizations going through to learn from together. We have a comprehensive diagnostic that's research-based and managed by RGK Center at UT Austin. We include volunteer engagement practices, individualized coaching. There's a certification or national accreditation organizations can achieve through this process, and that network of peers that I mentioned that help support everyone and bring them together. So to kick things off is an application. So we'll review the application here at the end of the of this informational webinar, so you're aware of kind of information you'll need to gather for it. But first we do an application to collect some information, and that's also for this particular initiative how we'll select the participants for the funding. After the orientation, we'll work with your organization to complete a diagnostic. So it's a research-based diagnostic where at least 3 people, but it varies on organizational size, will need to take the diagnostic. And then we'll review the results and sit down with you to take a look at those results. We do a diagnostic debrief where we sit down and it's a conversation. We say, here's some of the recommendations from the reports. How does that resonate with you? Are these things that you are top priority for you? Where are some low-hanging fruit that you can get started? And so from that debrief conversation about your results, we're able to help you start to identify your action plan and really what's to come next. After the debrief is the service enterprise trainings. So there are these training sessions will all be done virtually via webinar. We'll have 10 organizations and their teams of people participating. And it's really more of a workshop than a training. So we will present some content and information and then give you a chance as a team to work through it and think through how are we actually going to implement this within our organization and start to make a plan during the workshop time. From there, we'll bring you back together. So not only can you share out kind of what you're thinking and get feedback, but also hear from others in the cohort to hear what they're doing and see if there's, tips or tricks or things that they're planning to do that you could learn from and implement as well. After the webinar series is completed, then you'll begin coaching. So coaching is really individualized by the organization. We check in with you to see how things are going, often monthly. It's a bit of accountability, which makes it different than other trainings and conferences people might go to where, you go and then you come back to your office and you're just back in your day-to-day work. With the coaching, we're really able to check in and make sure you're continuing to make progress on your action steps and the things you identified that you wanted to accomplish as you went through the process. During the coaching, we'll be working to help you build your capacity. And again, senior leadership will continue to be engaged. Something unique that we are incorporating in this particular program as part of the funding is that as you go through this process, we want to give you an opportunity to try out the things you've learned and really kick off and let the community know. So we'll be incorporating a 9/11 day of service for all the participants to make a plan of how volunteers can really engage in their work and have that be an entry point where people can come, volunteer, learn about your organization, your mission, and see if maybe that's something that they want to do in a more long term. So we'll give you some tips and tricks on how to host a successful 9/11 day of service as well. After you we've been working with you on coaching, you've made a lot of changes, you've implemented a lot of the things from your action plan, we'll work with you on submitting for certification so you can achieve that national accreditation in volunteer engagement. After that, it's really just continuous improvement. We hope that you'll continue to learn and grow. This process is not something where you can do it once and just be done. We really hope it's something that it sets the structures in place that you can regularly be reviewing your processes and saying, is this still what works best for us? Are there other roles volunteers could play that help our organization? How can we continue to be better? And through this process, hopefully we give you the tools that can continue far beyond anything that we're doing in the training time itself. So for this initiative, a few of the requirements for any of the organizations going through, first is that you need to actively participate in all components of the process. So we'll want you to have your team actively involved in the training workshops. We don't want it to be just us talking at you. We really want it to be interactive and opportunities for you to discuss as a team. So be prepared for that. You can see the dates there for the virtual trainings. They'll be 2 hours each about every week with a kind of a break midway through. And we expect at least 3 people at all the sessions. So among those 3 people, we expect you to have a board member, a senior leader, usually executive director, and then whoever is the lead for engaging volunteers at minimum. So for larger organizations, we often see that they're engaging, the directors of different programs within their organization. So that way they have input from, all the areas of the organization. For smaller organizations, sometimes, if it's an all volunteer organization, it might be, the board members if it's mostly board run. It really just depends by the organization, and we're happy to sit down and talk with you about who really makes most sense to participate. But as I mentioned, a minimum of 3 people do need to be involved in all sessions. If for some reason you can't have the same board member attend every single time, we do try to allow some flexibility that, maybe you can rotate which of your board members are attending, which gives the benefit of, sometimes for scheduling, it's hard for board members, but also it gives the opportunity for more board members to have an idea of what you're working on and have more input in it. And we've really seen that another outcome of this is a much more engaged board, that boards of directors, after going through, are much more engaged in thinking about other skills and networking and supports that they can bring to the organization. We'll also ask that you develop that action plan to implement that will really help guide your work and next steps. Part of this receiving the implementation funding is hosting a 9/11 day of service. And so we'll have you post information about what you're doing for your day of service on our statewide volunteer opportunity database, and then ask that you engage at least 75 volunteers in that process. And so that can look a lot of different ways what those volunteers are doing, and we can talk more about that as well. And then the last requirement is to submit a mid-project and project end reports that are really more just a check-in for us to get your feedback on how it's going, we're doing, what you've learned so far, any improvements that we can make in the supports given to you, and hear about things that are going well for you that might be helpful for other organizations. So it's less of a report of what have you done so far and more of a check-in of, how has it gone and what's the experience been for you? So that way we can continue to improve on this work. All right, so now we'll do a quick review of the application itself, so you can see a little bit more about what will be expected as you go to submit an application to participate. So this is in a Microsoft form. The link is, and it's all on one page, so you can go on and see all the questions that you'll be asked all at once without having to, click through. With that, I do generally recommend for any sort of online application, and certainly for this one, that especially for the narrative section questions, that it might be easier to type that into a Word document, and then when you go to apply, actually copy and paste your answers into the form. Just as a precaution, I would hate for anyone to do a lot of work in crafting your answers and then have something, not save or your battery loses power. So just a helpful recommendation to put it in a Word document first. The first part just is really a description of what it is and the process. So you can see that this is really, again, as I shared, we hope that this will be an opportunity for you to go through the service enterprise process and hold a 9/11 day of service as a kickoff, but also get some implementation funding to help make that happen. We really invite any organization across the state of Iowa to apply, but really encourage those, especially in rural communities, those in areas with high poverty rates or those serving traditionally underrepresented populations to apply. And so as you're thinking about your responses below and filling those out in your narratives, if you're able to incorporate, if any of those things apply to your community and your organization, that you mention that in one of your narrative responses to help us make sure that we know. So again, goes through kind of the process of you'll take an assessment, we'll debrief the results, you'll attend the training sessions, you'll get coaching, you can apply for certification and receive implementation funding. Here is where the link to today's informational webinar will be, the recording, so you can go back or share it with colleagues. It outlines expectations of the application, orientation, diagnostic, the dates for the training session. So go ahead and get those saved on your calendars. The action plan, the coaching calls, tracking, and the assessment. So applications are due by December 4th at noon. So do make sure that you get your application in by then. If you don't have your application in by that time and we haven't heard from you, we can't consider you for the program. So do just make sure you get it submitted by December 4th at noon. Up to 10 organizations will be selected to participate, and it will really be based on the level of commitment that you have, but we also want to see a mix of organizations and really those organizations that I highlighted earlier that we're hoping to include. And also just want to acknowledge that this entire opportunity is really made possible by a 9/11 Day of Service and Remembrance grant from AmeriCorps, the federal agency. So thanks to that funding, we're able to offer this, again, not only at no cost, the service enterprise process, but also being able to offer that implementation funding to make these things happen. So in the application itself, you'll put the name of your organization, your address, city, state, zip, your EIN number, and then program manager name. This will really be your point of contact for this work. So, in some situations, it might be an executive director, and some it might be a volunteer engagement professional. Whoever is really going to be the lead contact for this work, you'll put them as the program manager name, their title, email, who we should reach out to with more information. Next up is contract manager name. And so this is the person, the point of contact will need to include in the contracting process to be able to provide the implementation funding. So oftentimes this is the executive director. So whoever kind of your main point of contact for contracting will be, include that information. Next, your organization's mission. A description of the population served, which you may then wish to incorporate some of the information shared above about areas of priority of who we want to participate. Include your the number of current volunteers, and this can be approximate. Generally kind of on an annual basis, approximately how many volunteers you are seeing at your organization. Describe your organization's current volunteer and staff structure, an example of volunteer opportunities being offered. Please limit your response to 200 words or less. The response limit is really because we don't want this to be a long, burdensome application. We don't want you to feel like you have to write pages and pages of information. So again, kind of a summary that'll give us a snapshot of where you're at currently, what you have in place, what volunteers are doing. Next is your organization's current strategic goals and challenges, and ideas you're having already about, how volunteers might be able to help support some of those activities. Next, how would you define success for this initiative? What do you hope will be different about your organization after you participate? How will you know that it was well worth your time or that it was effective going through? What is that vision you have for the future for your organization? Tell us a little bit about, what you hope to get out of the program. Then, how is your team well positioned to participate? So we'd like to hear in this section about your level of commitment. Do you have buy-in from senior leadership to participate, from your board? Do you have staff that are excited to do this? Hearing a little bit more about your readiness and commitment to the work. Next is about obstacles or barriers that exist within your organization that may impact success. So to be clear for this, listing obstacles or barriers will not affect your eligibility. We really want to know here, what challenges you anticipate, that you're able to anticipate those challenges and that you're looking for solutions to those challenges. Because that's a lot of what we'll be doing in the workshops is thinking through, what are those barriers and how can you as an organization and how can we support you in identifying those barriers and then addressing those barriers and removing them to move the work forward. And then lastly is actually listing who will be participating. So as I mentioned, there is the requirement that you have a board member, a senior leader, and a volunteer engagement professional who are engaged, so at least 3 people for the trainings. However, there may be others that you want to involve as well. So here we'd like you to list the name and role of the people that will be participating. At minimum, 3 people should be listed. We know that it's early, you don't know if you're accepted or not yet, so you might not be able to fully commit of this being our absolute final list. So if there are changes, that will absolutely be acceptable, but want to get that idea of kind of right now who you're thinking would attend those trainings. Then we want to make sure that your organization is able to commit to the requirements of the program, so that you'll be able. So you're going to kind of certify that you agree or not to attendance of at least 3 people to all the sessions, developing an action plan, hosting a day of service and engaging 75 volunteers and submitting reports, and agreeing that your leadership is bought in to participate, that you will attend all of the sessions and that you'll participate in any evaluation to help us, learn from this work and make sure that it really is impactful and making a difference from organizations. So once you do that, then you can go ahead and click submit and it's submitted into us. So from there, we'll be reviewing the applications and being in touch before the end of the year to let organizations know if you've been selected or not. So that way you can reach out to those who will be attending the trainings, get holds on calendars, we can answer questions, get contracts in place to be able to get you funding and get everything lined up. So with that, I will do a quick pause and see if there are any questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put those into the chat. And while people might be thinking, again, just a reminder that the applications are due on Monday, December 4th. And a few other resources that we wanted to make sure that you're aware of. So Volunteer Iowa offers numerous opportunities for nonprofits and local governments to help support them in their work. So we administer AmeriCorps state grants as well as an AmeriCorps Vista intermediary project. So if you're interested in learning more about AmeriCorps, please reach out to us. We have our city volunteer engagement initiative for cities. We host and partner with other organizations like the Volunteer Centers of Iowa to offer a number of volunteer engagement trainings. So if this seems like a really great opportunity, but you're not sure that your organization is quite ready yet, reach out and we can refer you to one of our volunteer engagement training program, which is really more of a 101 level for a staff person to learn more about those basic steps of volunteer management, like creating a volunteer application and how to screen a volunteer and kind of more of those basics. We have a number of resources on youth service, so engaging youth in volunteerism at your organizations and those structures to do that. A number of promotion and recognition opportunities, including the Governor's Volunteer Awards and the Volunteer Iowa Hall of Fame and Excellence in Mentoring Awards. We help communities plan for disaster and how they'll manage spontaneous volunteers in times of disaster and help resources for city and county leaders for that. Iowa Mentor is housed within Volunteer Iowa and is the Iowa Mentoring Partnership. So a lot of resources for youth mentoring programs or even just trainings for organizations that work with youth and have youth and adult partnerships to help develop that mentoring mindset among your adult and youth partners. AmeriCorps Seniors opportunities for engaging individuals 55 and older in different service. Our employer volunteer initiative to help support employers and thinking about how they can encourage their employees to give back, and Get Connected, which is an online volunteer opportunity database that organizations across the state can post your volunteer opportunities at no cost. And then people across the state can search those opportunities and find ways to volunteer and give back. So that's a great resource. If you're not already using it, you can go to our website at volunteeroiowa.org and start to post your opportunities and hopefully recruit some great volunteers on there. So I hope that you will consider participating and applying for our Service Enterprise cohort here and be able to access that implementation funding to help support that work. We, again, have seen so many organizations go through and really create changes, rethink about what volunteers can do. So often we hear, before it was like, oh, a volunteer could never do that. And now our staff are saying, oh, well, could a volunteer help with that? Which is really just a great culture shift to hear. And we also see at those organizations that they're having more and more volunteers. That's not always necessarily our hope with this, that you have a lot of volunteers, but that the roles that you do have are really high quality. And we've seen that as organizations go through, they identify more and more roles that volunteers could fill, and that volunteers are having a great experience, which not only helps retention, but also recruitment because they're bringing in so many new volunteers. So we've really seen it help transform and make organizations thrive. So we hope that we'll be able to work with your organizations and do the same. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to answer questions about the application or even just answer questions about other resources that might be a good fit to support the work you do. So with that, I will wrap things up, but appreciate your time and your interest in this program and hope to hear from you all soon. Thanks so much.